South Hunting Podcast, presented to you by the Onyx Hunt app. This is Mike Higman, and I cannot tell you how excited I am to launch what we have for you today. This is something that I've been working on for probably over 6 months, and it's taken a while to put together. I've done a lot of different interviews, and a year ago, we were releasing the Scent Debate series between John Eberhardt and Dan Infalt. And I think this is something that might kind of fall along those same lines. That was extremely popular, and hopefully this will be as well. If you're new to the program, that was episode number 13, 14, and 15. And we basically talked about different strategies for scent control. I would really encourage you to go back and listen to those. This is going to be something a little different. We are going to be talking about deer movement related to the weather. And this isn't just some opinions. I talked to 3 different biologists based on different studies, and then summed it up with Lindsay Thomas of the QDMA about what these studies have to say about how deer move in related to different weather patterns. So I'm asking everybody to come into this with an open mind, and might kind of change some of your thinking as to what you're doing when you're hunting. So I think it's going to be really cool. Just to kind of open this up, I wanted to bring in some other hunters and kind of get a general consensus of, what some of the different opinions are out there. So we started out with Spencer Neuharth, who kind of helped me come up with this idea, not intentionally, but just listening to some of his stuff with Rut Radio. Then we talked to our own Adam Cruz. Then we brought in Will Brantley from Field and Stream. He's their hunting editor. And finally, I talked to Jeff Genki from The Hunting Beast. We kind of got a lot of different opinions there. So we're going to start out with those. And then I'm going to bring in Dr. Bronson Strickland from the MSU Deer Lab and Dr. Stephen Webb from the Noble Institute and talk about some of their GPS studies. That's all going to be part 1. Part 2 is going to start off with Dr. Duane Diefenbach from the Penn State Deer Forest Study Group. And then we're going to talk to Lindsay Thomas from the QDMA. Then to shake things up a little bit, we're going to talk to the mad scientist himself, Mark Drury, about his thoughts on deer movement in the weather. I think you're really going to be interested in what he's got to say as well. We're going to sum everything up. I'm going to go back and talk to the same people that we interviewed in part 1 and see what they think after they've heard all of these different studies, if it changed their thoughts at all. Even though it's a labor of love, putting something together like this takes quite a bit of time and effort. If this is something that you find helpful or something you enjoy, I would really appreciate it if you would share it on social media. And also, if you could go into Apple Podcast or whatever your podcast player is and leave us a rating and some feedback. That would really help the podcast out quite a bit. I am really excited about getting this information out to you, and I'm really excited to hear your feedback on it. Before we jump into those first interviews, I do want to remind you about huntinggeardeals.com. If you're shopping for some hunting gear right now, don't forget to go there and check it out. They've got all the best deals and links to them from various websites, Amazon, Cabela's, Bass Pro Shops, Walmart. There's a lot of outdoor stores, Gander Outdoors, and that kind of stuff as well. So if you're in the market for some new hunting gear with season coming up here, don't forget to be checking out there daily to see what the latest deals are. All right, I think I've talked long enough. Let's get it on. All right, I've got Spencer Neuharth on the phone here with me. And Spencer is the host of Rut Radio from Wired to Hunt. And I'm going to give him a chance to explain what that is. But I also want to share, he was part of the genesis of me having this idea to do the research and talk to these guys about how weather affects deer movement. But in researching this, I found that he's more qualified than just hosting the podcast that interested me in it. He also has a biology degree, and I knew this ahead. He also does a lot of outdoor writing. So welcome to our little show here, Spencer.
Well, thank you for having me, Mike. This is the first podcast that I've been a part of that's not Rut Radio or Wired to Hunt, so it is a unique experience for sure.
Oh, that's crazy. Well, you should be doing like a full episode. We'll have to make you a Southerner for an hour or so and have you back to talk about it.
Well, from South Dakota, so that's pretty southern.
Southerner? Yeah, that's right. So can you just tell us basically how Rut Radio works? I think probably most of the people listening to this have heard it, but maybe there's a few out there that haven't, just to kind of frame how the weather goes into that.
So Rut Radio is a mini-series of Wired to Hunt, and in 2018, this will be our 3rd year of doing it. And each week in the fall, from September to January, I call 4 or 5 contacts that kind of span across whitetail country. Our lineup might be like, Montana, Missouri, Michigan, Georgia, New York, or something like that. Get some diversity in there from our context, and talk to each one of them and get an idea of what kind of buck movement they're seeing and what kind of buck movement they're projecting. And with each call, I kind of hit some of the same 3 or 4 notes, as far as I ask them on a scale of 1 to 10, what do you think the buck activity has been lately? And I ask them on a scale of 1 to 10, what do you think the buck activity is going to be in this coming week? And kind of the idea of the show is to just get some timely intel out there, as far as what other guys are seeing, and, maybe give hunters another piece of the puzzle to help them decide on what stand to sit, or, confirm or deny what they think they've been seeing in the woods with some other ideas from other people.
And what percentage of the people that you talk to would you guess say their number is based on whether there's like the weather's hot or there's a cold front coming?
That is definitely the number one factor. And so I would say, 90% of the guys, address the deer movement, basing that off of what the weather has been or what it's going to be. The other big thing, especially this last year, was food sources. The acorns were the talk of October, as far as what the acorn crop looked like. But for the most part, whether it's September or January, people are discussing weather, what the weather looks like and how that's going to affect the deer that we're hunting.
So it seems to me, just listening, that almost everybody says something about, what the weather's going to be like. And these are like legitimate hunters that, are very experienced, successful hunters. It's not just, guys off the street that you're finding. So it seems like everybody says that except for Lindsay Thomas, who you had on a couple times. And Lindsay always said, well, the weather doesn't really matter. It's, the deer are going to come out when they're going to come out regardless. And that really piqued my interest when I heard that. And I think you noticed it as well. And I know I've heard Lindsay and maybe Bronson Strickland and some of these other guys say that before, but somehow when it was lined up next to everybody else saying weather, 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 and then something totally different, I found that really interesting. I think you noticed that as well, right?
Yeah, I found that if you have QDMA beside your name, that you typically aren't putting as much stock into cold fronts or warm fronts as everybody else we talk to.
Is that anything with your biology background where you might have thought about anyway if those guys hadn't said it, or is that kind of seemed different to you as well?
No, I definitely have an appreciation for what those guys say, and I think I listen a little more closely when they talk. And so with my biology background, I primarily worked with fish, and that being an endangered species, a pallid sturgeon. I spent about 5 years working with them. And so I don't have a direct, link to hoofed animals and stuff like that, but that background definitely gives me an appreciation for what biologists have to say and the kind of work that they're doing. And so that's why I like to get like Lindsay on the podcast as much as I can without overdoing it with, reports from Georgia, or, Matt Ross from, QDMA as well. He's another guy that I really value what he has to say. And so I think my biology background definitely plays a role in that. But I think the deer hunting community in general could use a little bit more of that information as well. Less of the guys who are just kind of going off of, your grandfather's wisdom, and more of looking into what these scientists and biologists have to say.
So when you did your season summary with Mark and Dan, basically the last, once Hunt Rut Radio is wrapped up, you mentioned you had thought about looking into this some more. I don't know if you've had the chance to do that at all yet, or if I kind of stole your thunder by starting this up, but I would definitely wanted to include you in it. Have you had a chance to look any more into what some of these guys are saying?
No, I have not. But like I said, with my biology background, I've always, whenever a headline pops up regarding a new deer study, I find myself reading it. And so I think it's just kind of a cumulative thing that's brought me to what I kind of feel today. And that's that cold fronts don't make as big a difference as everyone thinks they do. Okay, so
you might be kind of struggling with the same things I am because of hearing so many experienced hunters say the opposite. Like, for example, the juries. It sounds like maybe you don't buy into 100% it not being, I guess you don't believe it's completely irrelevant, but maybe just not as valuable. Is that kind of where you're falling right now?
Yeah, I would say that's the best way to put it. And I think what's happened is that in the deer hunting community, it's kind of an echo chamber. Just like if you are a Republican, you tend to listen to right-wing news. And if you're a Democrat, you tend to listen to left-wing news. And so you kind of get in your own echo chamber with politics. And I think that's happened with deer hunting, that we've heard this said for so long that cold fronts equal buck movement, that it's almost become accepted as fact, in that I don't think it's appropriate to give it that title, to just, see a cold front coming in late November and thinking this is going to be, the best October 26th we've had in years because this cold front is here. I don't think we should put as much stock into those cold fronts as we do, just because we hear it so often.
Yeah, I agree. And this is definitely a topic I'm interested in talking to some more biologists about. So I'm looking forward to kind of wading through this topic myself. And I appreciate you kind of bringing the idea to the forefront of my mind.
Yeah. And I'm not saying that biology or the studies that have been done are the end all answer either. Just because if you look at some of these most famous studies that have been done on deer movement, based on a number of factors, I think one of the more popular ones, had like 40 collared deer. And so that might seem significant, but if you look at that in terms of like humans, there's about 30 million whitetails in the US. And so if you looked at a state like California, who has about that many people in it, you wouldn't survey 40 people in California and then, be like, okay, this is how everyone in California acts, thinks, talks, whatever, just because you saw a trend from those 40 people. And so I'm not saying that these studies that we've seen done are the exact answer either. I think that deer are individuals more than there's this, no free will thing, that moon patterns make them do this, weather patterns make them do this. And so just saying that biology has it right and everyone else has it wrong, I don't think that's appropriate either.
Yeah. Well, I don't think doing one little podcast on it is going to solve the issue for anybody, but it certainly should give us some good food for thought. So I really appreciate you coming on for a few minutes just to kind of frame this whole discussion. And I'm looking forward to talking to some more of these biologists, and hopefully you enjoy hearing what they have to say as well.
Well, thank you for having Mike. I look forward to listening to the episode.
All right, I've got on the line with me Will Brantley. He is the hunting editor of Field and Stream and Outdoor Life, and he's somebody that I met at the QDMA convention back in 2017, and I've been hoping there's been an opportunity where we could get a chance to bring him on the podcast, and I thought this would be a great opportunity. Hey, Will, how you doing?
I'm doing good, Mike. I appreciate you having me on.
Yeah, I'm excited about this. I just want to bring you on and talk about weather and how it affects your hunting. We're going to be talking about these studies, these GPS tracking studies, and I was really interested to talk to some people before and after. So could you just start out by kind of giving me your opinions on weather affecting deer movement now and how it affects how you hunt?
Well, it's a great question. I mean, as hunters, we all want to sit in the stand when it's comfortable and during the conditions that we have in our mind as, the ideal deer hunting conditions, those cold, crisp mornings and high pressure and all that good stuff and the wind right in our face. But the reality is, I mean, during the course of a season, you only get a handful of days like that, especially when you're hunting down south. I live in Western Kentucky, and, I think the question of what's the ideal deer hunting weather really depends on the phase of the hunting season. Our archery season opens the first Saturday in September. This year, that was September 1st. And although we hope for it to be really nice and cool and pretty, the reality is most of the time in September, it's still summer here in Kentucky. It's still going to be pretty hot. And during that first week of the season in particular, when the bucks are still in velvet, in their bachelor groups, really still doing the same summer patterns that they've been on since May, June, July, August, what you're looking for above all else, I think, is just consistency, because that's really what you're trying to take advantage of as a hunter during those very earliest days of bow season is that consistency. Those deer coming from their bed to their feed virtually every afternoon, and on occasion in the right situations in the morning too. So that consistent weather oftentimes is going to be hot. It's going to be 80, 85, and maybe even 90 degrees. Gosh, this year, the first few weeks of our season have been really hot. It's even supposed to get up to like 93 this week, and it's pretty miserable for sitting in the stand. But when you have deer that haven't been hunted all year and they're on a consistent pattern, really what you want more so than just cool temperatures are, consistent conditions, something that they're just going to stay on that pattern day in, day out. Now, I think things change pretty fast, particularly in the month of September. About the middle of September, you're going to start having bucks shed their velvet. Those bachelor groups are going to start breaking up. And, I'm of the opinion that really as soon as a buck's velvet is stripped off, something changes in his mind. He's immediately thinking about the rut, even though it's still a couple of months away. He's starting to think about, possibly a new fall home range. Food sources are starting to shift. He's starting to leave a few rubs, maybe check a scrape here and there. And really just his entire demeanor begins to change. And for that reason, those summer patterns that seem just so predictable, so rock solid a few days earlier, they start to change. And so a lot of your bucks start going nocturnal, things like that. And as that happens, later in September, the first part of October, I really start to look specifically to cold fronts to do most of my hunting. So much so, in fact, that some of the small properties that I hunt, to prevent overpressuring them, I almost hunt just almost exclusively around cold fronts, either right as soon as they're passing. I've had some great hunts on afternoons when a cold front was coming through. It was kind of raining, the temperature was dropping. It was just kind of getting chilly early in the fall, and then especially on the day after. Once that cold front's gone through, it's gotten a little cooler and that high pressure sets in. A lot of times in a situation like that, you can have a deer that may have been predictable a few weeks earlier. Your trail cameras are starting to tell you that he's moving mostly after dark, but you get a front like that and it can be enough just to get him up on his feet. Just, still coming to a food source, but just a little bit earlier than he would have had it still been 80 degrees and southeast wind and kind of stale. So I start really looking for that. And then, of course, as you get later in the season, the deer are going to rut regardless. Sometimes I think if it's hot, they're going to do most of that activity at night, where hunters may not see them. It may seem like there's no rut going on at all, but the reality is those deer are wearing a pretty thick coat, and it's hot, and it's not real comfortable to be up on their feet chasing does and things like that. So, obviously hunter pressure and things like that, they all play a role in that too. And then as you really get to the latest part of the season, I think the weather probably plays the most critical role of all at that point, in that, you're really back to targeting deer on food sources, and they've been pressured, they've been shot at, and it really can take an extreme cold weather event, in my experience anyway, to get those deer up on their feet in daylight and make them predictable once again. So, in a nutshell, I guess there's your answer. So, according to me anyway.
Yeah, well, I think that was a really interesting rundown, especially the part about the beginning of the season and actually looking for a consistent weather pattern. It's not something you typically hear about. Like, you'd be upset if you got a cold front and it dropped down in the 70s,
Sure. I've had some good hunting early in the season right around the cold front. And that's not to say that weather can't make the deer activity really good. But, again, what I'm looking for early in the season is just a consistent pattern. If that deer, if day after day, the average high temperature is 90 degrees and the wind is out of the southeast, and that deer is bedding at point A, walking 200 yards across a bean field to point B, I would like the conditions to be just like that when I plan my ambush opening week of season. So you get that 70-degree day as you're climbing up in your stand. That deer may already be up on his feet, and he may be checking out some different food source somewhere else just because the weather feels good to him, and he's sort of feeling his oats and kind of up walking around early. So doesn't mean the deer won't be moving. It's just that your chances of killing a good deer that you've patterned on that bed to feed pattern, that late summer bed to feed pattern, that they're often at their best when the weather is just consistent. Now, if that consistent weather is 2 weeks of 100 degrees, a lot of times, my trail cameras have kind of shown me that even in the early season, when you get that really extreme hot weather for an extended period of time, even deer that are on their summer patterns, a lot of times that's going to push them to moving right at dark and really right after dark. And this year, especially, we probably had one of the slowest early seasons that I've personally had in Kentucky, because we've had a lot of weather like that. We've had a lot of those mid 90 degree days, hot, dry, and just day after day after day of that. And, after a while, that begins to take its toll on the deer movement.
So you mentioned that, a lot of your smaller properties, you'll try to stay out of them, waiting for the right weather to hunt. Is that a case where you might be hunting different properties, or do you tend to just kind of stay home, during those hot spells?
Once upon a time in my deer hunting career, I guess when I was especially mad at them, so to speak, when the weather conditions weren't ideal to hunt my best places, I'd put a climber on my back and wade off into public ground and try to shoot a doe. And I'll still do that to some degree. I'm just, most of the time, if it's 95 degrees and the conditions aren't ideal to hunt my best areas, and I know the deer movement's probably going to be slow anyway, a lot of times I'll just try to stay at my desk, get caught up on some deadlines. I might do some food plot work, things like that. September's a great time, really, to get a lot of fall food plots in this time of year. And I've actually been doing a lot of that this season. Just general season prep when the conditions weren't ideal, and getting things in really good shape for later in the fall when I hope things change.
Yeah, it's a long season. You don't have to come all the first week, right?
That's right.
So I guess the last thing I wanted to touch on, are there any other specific weather patterns that you look for, as opposed, like precipitation or pressure or that kind of stuff, that affect where and when you hunt?
Well, one of my favorite conditions, not just, I would probably call it an early season condition all the way up through the pre-rut. I do like on those rare afternoons when you can catch a front that's still moving through, but you're kind of on the backslide of it, so to speak, and you get those winds that are, we get a lot of southeast winds here early in the season, and it's funny, as bow hunters, so many of my stands are set up for a west wind or a north wind, the winds that we think of as ideal during deer season. But for the months of September and October, we get a lot of southeast wind. And so when those fronts are coming through, you start having that weather shift to the south and then the southwest, and then gradually around to the west and gradually around to the northwest. A lot of times it'll get kind of breezy. It won't get cold, but it's starting to get a little chilly. A little jacket feels nice, and you get just that light little mist, not a downpour, but just that light little mist, kind of that gray sky. Those to me are some of your very best movement conditions early in the season up through the pre-rut. And generally, I like to be on a pretty large food source of some sort, whether, sort of a big destination type food plot, something like that. You just seem to get a lot of deer sort of stepping out into the open under those conditions. And if I were to pick my favorite conditions to hunt at that time of the season, that would be it. Now, you get later in the year during the rut, I like those post-frontal high pressure days when it's cold, the skies are blue. I won't say that I always see deer under those conditions, but usually you can count on those days being pretty good. And it's just, it's just kind of aesthetically pleasing. It's just nice conditions to be sitting in the woods, sitting in a tree stand, watching the sun come up. So,
last thing, how about the moon? Do you pay any attention to what the moon is doing?
The one time a year that I really watch the moon, I don't pay just a ton of attention to it early season, late season, during the rut. Mid-October, I will say, say what you will about the October lull, the moon phase. You can, there have been studies that say the moon phase has this effect or doesn't have this effect. There have been studies that say, buck movement just gradually increases throughout the month of October. And that may generally be true, but I will say that a full moon right in the middle through, anytime between about the 10th and the 25th of October, a full moon combined with kind of stagnant warm weather, I can just almost guarantee slow movement conditions around here. We have an early 2-day muzzleloader season that falls in the middle of October, and I always look at the moon phase during that, and if it is going to be a full moon during those 2 days, you can just almost bet money on it that the movement is going to be slow. And if we happen to luck into a new moon or really any other moon phase in a cold front, sometimes that weekend can be pretty good. But my wife and I, after years of bow hunting together, we always watch for that full moon in October, and we always kind of plan on it being like, this is a good week to go fishing because the hunting's probably kind of suck. So, so aside from that, I'm always aware, I guess, kind of the moon phase, and I'll make a note of it if I have, a few days of really tough hunting or a few days of really good hunting. I might take note of the moon phase, but that time, mid-October, full moon, usually the hunting is not too good, at least around here.
Well, I've really enjoyed this. I know we're just talking opinions here, but what you have to say, I think, is very compelling and sounds very well informed. So I'm really excited to have you listen to some of these other interviews I've done. But I'm really interested to hear what you think about what we've got coming up, and I'm looking forward to getting back with you on that.
Good deal. I am too, Mike.
All right, I've got my boy Adam Cruz on the line, and he knows what the deal is. We're talking about deer movement and weather patterns, but he has not heard these interviews that we've got on tap yet. So before we listen to those interviews, I wanted to get Adam's opinion on weather and deer movement and how it affects how he hunts and that kind of stuff. So what's up, Adam?
Hey, man. I like how you introduced me as your boy. I feel like we're getting tight.
Yeah. Well, we've been doing this over a year now, so hopefully we're boys by now.
Yeah, my wife thinks so.
All right, well, I guess that's good. As long as she doesn't hate my guts for making you do this.
No, not yet.
All right, well, good. All right, so here's the deal. Can you just give me a rundown of your basic opinions on how weather affects deer movement and how that affects how you hunt?
Okay, so I'm just going to use, this is my opinions only. This is I don't keep long-lasting journals, but I can tell you, since I've been like a 10-year-old boy heading out into the woods with my dad, we would always be watching the weather. And if the weather took a plunge, I can guarantee you that we would have been out in a field or someplace that we traditionally see a ton of deer. And those mornings or those afternoons where we saw a plunge in temperature, we would see more deer. So I'm not sure that there's anything that these interviews where you can say that'll really change my mind on that. However, I will say the way that I've hunted in the past has really depended on that. So if I had let's say like a perfect day, the temperatures were rising into the 70s, I may skip that weekend of hunting to watch football or to do something else. So I can see how it might be skewed, because the worse the weather in a lot of ways is the best hunts I've traditionally had in the past.
So specifically, like, what weather are you looking for when you're planning out a hunt? Like, what's the perfect weather to be out hunting?
For me, I mean, if the temperature takes a dip, say like 15 degrees or more from the day before, and I know I'm a little bit different than like a Mark Drury. I always hear Mark Drury and a lot of other guys that have killed way more whitetails and better whitetails than I ever will say bluebird days are the best. Man, I've had more success when it's overcast and drizzly, like just barely got that drizzle of rain coming. I don't miss days like that in the woods. So that's really the days that I'm honed in on, and I might even take a day off of work to go and try to get out in a tree stand.
All right, cool. Well, I guess that pretty much sums it up. I can tell you this. I just talked to Will Brantley, and he had a lot more to say about it than you did. But
I don't doubt that. This is Adam. That was Will Brantley.
That's why we're podcast hosts and those guys are podcast guests, right?
Yeah. I mean, I don't know what else to say, really. There's tons of ways of looking at it. I'm really just excited to hear what everyone else says. We always say that we're not the experts, so I'm definitely not that. I'm a weekend warrior by all the definition in the world. So anytime I can get in the woods where it works for my family, I'm doing it regardless of the weather. But weather does dictate when I might skip out.
I've been sitting on these interviews for a long time, and I'm just really excited to put them out there for everybody to listen to, including you. I really want you to hear them and get your thoughts on, basically if it's going to change the way you think at all, or basically you're going to go on your experience and what everybody seems to believe.
Well, you changed my mind on scent control some, so maybe we can do it here.
Yeah, and let's be clear, it wasn't me changing your mind. It was like Dan Infault changing your mind, but yeah.
That is true. Dan and John, I have a whole new outlook on scent control now.
Yeah. Well, we'll see. I hope this is a game changer.
Well, let's see, man.
All right, now I'm talking to Jeff Genki from The Hunting Beast, and he's been getting a lot more involved with that. I know he's doing a ton with their social media. He's running the Facebook page. And I actually had the pleasure of meeting Jeff last hunting season. I was up there for a wedding, and we did a deer drive together. So that's pretty cool to get to meet you, and I'm glad to have you on the podcast now.
Thanks for having me, Mike. Are you coming back this fall to trunch through the swamp again?
I don't have any nieces getting married this fall, so I don't have a good reason to get up there. But I'm thinking this is totally off track, but I think we should just advertise this real quick. It took us 0 time to get off track. Do you know what Wisconsin's program is for first-time hunters? I know it's really cheap to get your first-time license up there.
Yeah, I think if you're a first-time buyer, I want to say it's $5.
It's So I know I need to get up there, and I know some guys that can help me get started on what areas to hunt too. So.
That's awesome. We'd love to have you. You always got an open invitation. So if you're willing to put up with us and go through the swamp, you're more than welcome.
Yeah. I'm used to going through the swamp, but it's a little, your swamp's a little colder than mine.
It is. Just don't fall through. That's the key.
All right. So we talked a little bit about, before we started recording, what we're going to be talking about here. So let's just get started with it. Can you give me a quick rundown of what weather you focus on and how it affects where and when you hunt?
How and where I hunt based on the weather. Let's see. Anytime that there's some real inclement weather up here, if we're in the fall of the year and we're having tremendous amount of snow, I'm making sure I'm out in the wood right immediately after that snow breaks or that nastiness lets up. I think a lot of those big bucks, they hunker down, but as soon as they get a chance, then they'll go out and they'll start cruising around, looking around, things like that. That doesn't just apply to, snow, but I also find that same exact thing when you're having torrential rain or heavy downpours and it's been raining for 24 or 48 hours and there's been a break in the weather. They're going to get up on their feet. They're going to start cruising, reopening scrapes, just claiming everything back as theirs.
How much do you focus on weather fronts and cold fronts coming through on a regular basis?
Cold fronts, I love it. I just love that. I think once that, in Wisconsin especially, when the colder it gets, I just think they get on their feet and that just kicks everything into gear. It's like that internal time clock goes off and it's a rut. I got to be chasing and doing something. I've had the experience with warm days in the fall. To me, kind of shuts everything down and slows activity down. But there's still activity. I just find that it's not as aggressive.
Do you base when you hunt on the weather much, or is it more you're going hunting no matter what, and maybe you'll base where you hunt based on how you think the opening's going to be?
Personally, with me, I'm always out there anytime I can get an opening. Time is always limited with that challenge, but I'm going to be out there and I'm just going to use whatever wind to my best advantage. And I mean, if it's obviously a snowstorm or a completely rainstorm and I know nothing's going to move, I'm going to try to adjust my schedule to take advantage of those breaks.
So we've got early season now, and I know early season you guys like to try to focus on food sources that are close to bedding. If it's hot, does that affect like how close you're trying to push in? Or are you pretty much doing the same thing regardless, but maybe you expect to see a little more when the weather's cooler?
Let me use the example of this past weekend. We opened up on Saturday. Okay, temperatures were around 86 degrees, sunny, like 5 mile an hour wind, but hotter than all get out. What we did, or what I did, yeah, it sounds miserable here for us guys. What I did was I found the first food source just outside of the bedding area in the cattail swamp. So we were hitting oak trees that were dropping acorns like crazy. That same approach we use early season, we use that in the rut, and we use that kind of late season. All throughout the year, we'll be moving in as close as we possibly can. We find those beds in the off season, sit down in them, pick out the tree that we can locate to be the correct distance without getting busted. Early season, you can definitely get away with being closer because of foliage. But yeah, that's ours. So, think of it. It's hot out. Those deer, they got to live in it anyways. They're out there. They're going to get up. They're going to move. We were miserable from it, but they were moving. When I was out there on Saturday, I had 2 nice bucks. They stayed out of shooting distance, but they were, just off in the distance. They were up on their feet. They were moving. They came out of the bedding area that I thought they'd be in.
Yeah. So let's say there's a cold front coming, and last weekend the temperature was dropping 15 degrees from normal. Would that have changed like where you hunted or anything like that? Or you're pretty much doing the same thing regardless of what the weather is?
This right now, and that is happening. We're supposed to have it about 10, 15 degrees colder midweek. I'm doing the same approach. I'm not going back to where I was because I stunk that bedding area up. I'm just going to a different one, and I'm throwing these tactics right at it.
Okay, cool. So how about the moon? Does that affect when you hunt at all?
You found my weak spot. I wish I knew a lot more. I've listened to Dan and Andre talk quite a bit about that moon and figure it out, moon underfoot or overhead. I don't know a lot about that, to tell you the truth. So in my experiences, the only thing I used to think, and I can't pinpoint it is whenever I did encounter a full moon during the rut, I always saw less deer during the day in hill country. And I don't know if that's because they were out and they had a little bit more security of that high moonlight where they could see farther. I know they can see great in the night anyways, but if that gives them any bit more of a advantage, I'm not 100% sure on that, but that's the only real experience I've had with the moon.
All right, cool. Perfect. Well, that's a great rundown of the way you see things now. So I'm really looking forward to getting back with you once this drops and you get a chance to listen to what these other biologists have to say. So I hope we can get back together in a week and talk about what these guys had to say.
That sounds like a great thing, Mike. One thing I do want to share with you guys is our friends over at Legendary have a current give back program. What they're doing is dumping in $1 million into the hunting community so that people, all they have to do is go on their website, take a picture of their current license, send that over to them with an email address, and what they'll do is they'll send you back a $25 gift card for their website. So that license that you did work hard for to buy and purchase, you now can get that money back and use maybe for a gift card for somebody else or to buy a piece of gear off their website. So all you have to do is go to huntonus.com, and that will give you the link, and you can follow the instructions there to get part of that great give back.
And here's a perfect way to transition with that is they are also one of my partners with huntinggeardeals.com. So you could take that $25 gift card, time it right, and you can get some really awesome deals, especially maybe like Black Friday, that kind of stuff. They'll have some coupon codes and stuff too. So you could probably really stretch that $25 out. So that's a great fit.
Awesome. I'll be going over to yours and taking a look.
Cool, man. All right. Well, thanks a lot, and I will talk to you soon.
Thanks, Mike.
Okay, next we have Dr. Bronson Strickland. He is a professor of wildlife management at Mississippi State University, and he is also the co-director of the MSU Deer Lab. Welcome back to the show, Bronson.
Mike, I appreciate it. Thanks so much for having me.
So I'm really excited to talk to you about this topic because unlike some of the other people I'm interviewing about this, I really don't know what your ideas and feelings on it are at all. So I guess maybe first, could you kind of give me an idea of what experience you have with GPS tracking deer and hunting real quickly?
Yeah, well, on the science side, we have and when I say me, I mean we collectively at the MSU Deer Lab. We had a study that we conducted, 6 or 7 years ago, and we're currently engaged in one right now. So I'm going to be really interested that this time next year I'll be able to give you an update with study number 2 that we've looked at some of these questions. But our first study, we were really examining some of these very questions, Mike, that you and me and the Deer Lab and hunters are all interested in, and that is how weather, moon, et cetera, is going to affect deer movements. And we're just really, really lucky that the technology at the time, we were able to get locations at what we called a very fine grain or fine scale. We were able to follow these deer, 24 hours a day and get locations on them every 15 minutes. So every time they moved from point A to point B, we knew it and could record it. And so we put a study together to answer, all these questions that we've had, weather related and moon related to deer movements in the past. Me, regarding myself as a hunter, I'm just like everybody else, and I'm a human being, which means I have my biases. I have my preconceived notions, and things seem to make sense to me, just like a lot of other hunters, on what this perfect day would be. And again, that's the hunting side, that the temperature's doing this, the weather's doing that, this ought to be a good day to hunt. And I always have to remind myself, what did the data say? What should I expect, knowing the biology of the animal, and what did the data tell us? And so, yeah, I've been at conflict many, many times with, what I feel and think a deer should do and what the data tell us that they're doing. So that's something I can discuss with you tonight if that's where you want to go.
Yes, absolutely. So perfect. It sounds like I knew you'd be a good guy to have on this. I knew this was your, area type of expertise, but it sounds like you're exactly the kind of guy I need to have on this. So I guess let's jump into the study you just mentioned.
Okay.
What kind of data did that show as far as deer moving in relation to temperature? And then while we're at it, why don't we go ahead and mention some of the other things that, the moon and some of the other things that tend to get mentioned along with that.
You bet. Well, let me tell you a little bit about how we did this. And believe it or not, it gets a little more complicated when you've got 15, 20, 25, 30 deer with collars on them, and you kind of have to define, well, what is movement? What is extraordinary movement? And we tend to call them deviations. That's kind of the word we use, is what is normal? What is the baseline? What is the baseline for an animal? What is the baseline for this time of year? What is the baseline for this time of day? So we got to keep all that. What does this animal normally do this time of day, this time of year? And so that's what we do for all of these is what is our baseline? And then we go back retrospectively and we can pick out deviations. So this deer is out of the ordinary. He's out of the ordinary moving a lot, or out of the ordinary moving less. And what causes that? And so that's where we go back and we try to assign patterns or look for patterns. Was it a deviation in the temperature? How about the wind? How about humidity, moon phase, et cetera, et cetera? And Mike, the short of it is we can't find any strong evidence. So here's, I'm going to put my hunting hat on. I can't find any compelling evidence that's going to make me go hunt by looking at the forecast or the barometer. We just literally don't see any clear and consistent patterns. For example, in the wintertime with bucks, we really didn't see anything with temperature. The temperature's getting really cold, a front's coming in, the deer ought to be moving. Well, when you look at the data, and we looked at them, during the morning time, during midday, during, afternoon into evening, at night, we don't see on the average any change whatsoever. The same thing can be said that, there'll be some extremes here and there. We've, some extreme rain events, for example, that may decrease movements. One time we saw with pressure during the wintertime when there was a real change in pressure or barometric pressure, we would see at some really, really extremes, some bucks would move more. And maybe that was because there was a rain system had stabilized for a day or two, and then it cleared up, and maybe those bucks, moved a little bit more, or our data tell us that it did. But Mike, it's not consistent enough where you can really draw a rule or a pattern that's really going to make me modify my behavior to go chase a buck.
Okay.
And that probably lets the air out of your balloon, doesn't it? It did me.
Well, I will say no, because that's why I'm doing these interviews, because I had heard this information before, and I'm hoping to get your thoughts just as a hunter, because I believe the data, I believe in the science you guys are doing, but at the same time, I mean, just personal experience and just hunting anecdote seems like that's not the case. It seems like when, everybody says, well, when the temperature drops 10 to 15 degrees, then that's the time you got to be out there, because they're, going to be up on their feet.
Yep.
So let me ask this first. So I want to get into the study a little bit, just some general questions with it. Did you say that study was all bucks?
It was does and bucks.
Okay. And it was like 35 different deer.
That's right.
Okay. And spread out over how large an area?
Oh, let's see the study area. I'm digging deep here, Mike. It was several thousand acres.
Okay.
Don't quote me on this, but well over 5,000 acres.
And were there like major food sources in this area, like destination type food sources, like fields or food plots or anything, or is it all timber?
Yeah, there was definitely some agriculture and some range and places like that. So yeah, there was a diversity of cover food water.
Okay. And okay, so before I get to your opinion, the next thing I want to ask you about is, are you aware of any other studies that show similar results? And I don't need, obviously, I'm not asking you to spout out specific data, but maybe just some general information. Yeah, they did one this area, and this is kind of what it said.
Every study, Mike, that I'm familiar with, so when I see one that comes out in, one of our technical journals where, the data have been scrutinized, it's had, peer review, blind peer review, where people will read it, scrutinize the results, or their methods, and make sure it's, generating reliable knowledge. I read every one of those, and typically the conferences that I attend, I make sure I go sit in on those, and there's always going to be, if you conduct any study 100 times, there's going to be, just from random chance, a couple times where you might find a result, but the overwhelming majority, and I mean the overwhelming majority, is that these studies basically conclude they didn't find any reliable pattern. They're like, yeah, we saw a tendency here, or in this extreme event, there was a tendency for the deer to do that. But on the average, if it's something you're going to, try to make a rule or make a plan for yourself as a hunter, that there's never produced any substantial evidence that the weather is having really any big impact on deer movements.
Now, are these studies, this is a generalization here, but are they looking at both distance traveled and also that the times that they travel, like maybe they travel the same amount of distance, but they do it 30 minutes earlier when it's cold or something like that? Is that, are they looking at both those factors?
They typically are, especially more recently with the technology that we have. And let me revisit that. If you were going back 15 to 20 years ago, we just really didn't have the technology back then. That was when we were using radio frequencies, on the collars, and a biologist or a technician would be standing on the back of the truck with an antenna, waving it around, and at the most you might be able to get 2 locations on a deer per day. So with this newer type of GPS collars, we're getting locations from satellites triangulate where they are, and we're able to get locations on these deer at as fine a scale now as every 10 minutes. But most researchers are getting a location every 15 minutes to every hour. So addressing your question, and that's a very good question, one I've thought of as well, is maybe they're moving a little bit earlier. With the type of data that we're collecting now, we can usually control for that. And so we can even look at average movement rates within an hour. Whereas with old technology, we might have to look at daily movements, and we might say, hey, over the course of the day, the deer moved, on average about the same amount of distance. But Mike, as you brought out, that, well, maybe they're moving the same distance in a day, but maybe on these special days, they're moving a little bit earlier. That 10 additional minutes that they're out there or earlier where you see them. But, we control for that now because of the fine scale that we can record their locations. And so, here recently in the past 10 or so years, I would say, Mike, that we're able to take, that into account about the exact time of day and compare that, within the hour from day to day and from deer to deer.
And I know you guys are working on that massive study right now. I'm really excited to hear some of the data that's coming out. I'm sure it will take a while to analyze it and piece that out into actual, usable information. But I'm definitely excited to see what's coming out of that study because I think, it's going to be. Is there anything else that's been done to that scale with this technology recently?
Yeah, there's a lot of different studies. I'd probably say every couple years a new one is done. And a lot of times, Mike, it's with a new objective. A particular state or state agency or organization might have a unique question that they want answered, in their neck of the woods. But usually most every deer research program is going to look at this question because you have the data in hand. So you might be using these GPS collars to study something completely different. It might be a mortality study. It might be the impact of predators, type of study. But you just always got to keep in mind you've got that collar on a buck or a doe and you're getting those locations every hour. So you may as well go back and look and see, if weather or moon or anything, impacted deer movements in your area. So it's pretty common now.
Okay. So, all right, I'm going to ask you your personal opinion on this stuff, and then I'm going to ask you a few hard questions, and then I'll let you go. So how does this information affect the way you hunt? Do you buy into the science 100% where it doesn't even matter what the temperature is and the weather, or is that something that you still maybe put a little bit stock in?
It doesn't. Well, yeah, it gets really hard to disentangle the human factor here, my human bias. But here's one thing I keep in mind, Mike, is knowing the biology of the animal, knowing that animal is a ruminant, and know that they have to eat several times every single day. I like to think of it this way. A deer is going to move and put food in its mouth every single day, unless you're in extreme conditions up north and deep snow and things like that, which we don't encounter in the South. A deer is going to move every day. It doesn't matter if it's misting rain. It doesn't matter if it's pouring down rain. Now, sure, heavy rain might stifle some deer movement for a little bit, but the deer is eventually going to move and eat. So I try to keep that in mind. The other bias we always have to think about, Mike, is the old adage of, if I hadn't have believed it, I wouldn't have seen it, which is a play on, if I hadn't have seen it, I wouldn't have believed it. But we always have to keep in mind that a lot of times, so think about how that can be manifested in what you do, is you've got 2 days you can hunt, and one day temperatures are above average, it may be a little bit warm. The next day, the front's coming in and it's going to be colder. Which day are you going to choose to hunt?
Yeah, the colder day.
I'm going to go the colder day because it's going to be easier on me, right?
Yeah.
I've got it in my head, the deer are probably going to be moving. I'm going to feel better. I'm not going to be as hot where I'm at in Mississippi. I'm not going to be swatting as many mosquitoes, etc. And so then that works into, some confirmation bias that I went on that day. I saw deer on that day. But if I had been in that same stand the day before, it's certainly possible I may have seen just as many deer or more, but I don't know because I wasn't there. So I'm sorry that was long-winded, Mike, but basically that's what I keep in mind is that deer are going to move. Deer are going to move every single day. And maybe I'm just not at the right place to see the deer movement. And, you know, the same thing goes when you're talking about breeding activity. Hey, this is happening and that's happening, and the rut, what's going on with the rut? I'm not seeing deer breeding. Well, maybe you're just at the wrong place at the right time, but the deer are always going to breed. When we do what we call health checks in the springtime and randomly harvest does, where we can look at their condition and we can look at their fetuses, and from the size of the fetus we can backdate and determine their conception. I mean, that rut is pretty tight. Every single year those deer were bred, and it's regardless of what the moon phase was or what the weather was. When that doe comes into standing heat, standing estrus, and she's ready to breed, if there is a buck in the area, he is going to be there to find her and breed her. So regardless of what we think of, you know, hey, this was a good time or not, it's going to happen.
I'm going to ask you a few tough questions, and you're the first one I'm talking to, but we'll probably have some other people answer these questions too.
Okay.
Plenty of outdoor writer has looked through the Boone and Crockett and Pope and Young record books and added up when the most deer were killed, and that's, I believe, where a lot of this cold weather stuff comes from. So do you have an opinion as to why maybe more of these record deer are killed on cold weather days, or, you know, whatever they tie it to?
I would speculate, Mike, that some of it has to do simply with the timing of when gun season began. So that's the number one weapon, right? Rifle number one, I'm not sure between archery and muzzleloader, but rifle season is typically later in the year than archery season. So you have a timing of the year. Usually gun season is going to be around the rut, at least in the South. So generally, I mean, maybe we're overthinking it, Mike. Maybe it's more deer are killed in the colder weather because that's when the greatest access point is for hunters and the optimal weapon to kill big bucks. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that sounds like a plausible theory. Okay.
I don't know if it's right, but that would be my theory.
Okay. Next question. So when we get one of those cold days and you're like, man, it's going to be perfect to go out today, and maybe you get out a couple hours early and it seems that you see deer moving earlier. Do you think that's just maybe confirmation bias where you're seeing them because you're out there, and maybe if it was warm, you'd be seeing the same deer?
Yeah, I personally do. And I'm sure, Mike, you know, there are going to be some subtle differences here and there. But yeah, I really do. I really think that's the way I think about and organize my day. I know I am biased that when it is a beautiful day, and it is going to be beautiful at 1 p.m. in the afternoon, for example, I am far, far, far more inclined to get on my gear, strap on my climbing stand, and go find a tree, knowing that it's going to be easier on me temperature-wise. Now, if it's an above average day temperature-wise, like we get in the South a lot and it's hot, I don't know if I'm going to get out there at 1 o'clock. You know, I'm probably going to rely on that old philosophy of, heck, I just need to make sure I'm out there, you know, settled in an hour before dark.
Yeah, and I guess when I do think about it, you know, I can think of examples of when I went out when it was real cold and saw a deer maybe on a food plot when I walked up. But I guess if I try to think back even further to maybe some of those archery season days, and I might be walking up to a food plot, it might be 80 some degrees out, and there might have been deer on the food plot when I got there as well. So
that's right.
I get this. This is why I find this so interesting. So we'll see what some of the other guys have to say. I'm assuming you guys are looking at the same studies, so we might get a lot of the same answers. But it's a lot of fun to talk about something a little counterintuitive. So that's why I was real excited talking to you about this.
It is a lot of fun, Mike, and I have on the management side. I mean, I have colleagues when we have presented our results at conferences just come up scratching their head, and they say, I don't have anything I can think of to dispute your study or your findings, but it sure seems to me that there are certain days and certain times where I just see a lot more deer. And, you know, my human side is, yeah, that happens to me too. But We have to look at sample size. We have to look at replication. We have to look at randomization. To create these rules, we have to control for all the biases that we as humans, put into play. And the best thing, like we began this, Mike, the best thing we can do is, what do the data tell us? And the data don't lie. The deer don't lie, because we're using the deer to tell us, when they move.
Bronson, you co-host one of my favorite podcasts to listen to regarding hunting with the MSU Deer Lab podcast. Can you tell us a little bit about that, what you guys cover, and where people can find it?
Yes, Mike, thank you. Absolutely. So the podcast is called Deer University, and we really try to focus on information we've covered, Mike, several times and tonight and other podcasts. And we try to look at the management side of things and the deer biology side of things. And that's basically what our discussions are all about. How does deer biology relate to management? And often, how does that relate to hunting? And we cover all sorts of topics, deer diseases, culling, genetics, all these really hotly debated topics in the deer hunting world. And we try to apply, the cutting edge science that either we have conducted ourselves or colleagues we may have across the nation, and address all those concerns. And
great. And if somebody wants to reach out to you and talk to you about this or maybe something else with the podcast, what's the best way for somebody to get a hold of you?
If you want to contact me or Steve or Marcus or any of us, just go to our website, msudeerlab.com, and there you can see the personnel, and we've got our email addresses and contact information there. So just shoot us an email, and we'll have a conversation.
Awesome. Okay, well, thank you so much for your time. I'll be honest with you, I'm still torn on the subject. I definitely don't disagree with you, but I'm just, like you said, having a hard time swallowing this, but I'm hoping by the end of these interviews, I'm going to be able to be confident one way or the other. I'm so intrigued by this.
Hey, I am too, Mike. I mean, that's what's different. I'm a deer hunter, and I'm out there, and I'm stumped by these exact same questions. And me and the other members of the Deer Lab, you don't know how many conversations and good-spirited arguments we've had going back and forth. But that makes us stronger, because we'll look at it this way, look at it that way, and again, when it's all said and done, there's been no consistent pattern yet.
Thanks so much for coming on with us.
Anytime, Mike. Thank you.
The next expert we're going to talk to is Dr. Stephen Webb from the Noble Institute. He's the manager of Ag Systems Technology, and he's also a wildlife scientist. Welcome, Stephen.
Hey, Mike. Thanks. I appreciate you having me on.
Yeah, I'm really excited to have you on. It's kind of funny. I basically know you from Instagram. You guys have a great Instagram account with some really good GPS tracking technology on whitetail deer. I know you guys do some other stuff with hogs as well. Can you just give us an idea of what the Noble Institute is and what your position is there?
Yeah, not a problem. And it's funny you bring up Instagram. It's kind of funny how you make contacts these days through social media. But I'm glad you found the post and follow them. As Mike mentioned, I'm the Ag Systems Technology Manager at Noble Research Institute. We're a private agricultural research institute, and we focus on any type of ag research that you can think of, including natural resources. We have cattle operations. We do wildlife research. We have soil scientists on board, plant biologists, and we also have our own extension program where we have consultants that will work with landowners to help them with their needs, whatever that may be, from doing a wildlife management plan, helping them with a prescribed fire plan. In terms of the wildlife research that we do here, a lot of what we do revolves around GPS collars to study that spatial behavior of the animals. Our history has been mainly on white-tailed deer. Probably for about 25 years, that's been the primary species that we have studied in terms of wildlife. And that's just because it's one of the most common and, economically important game animals there is across the Southeast, including here in Oklahoma. And we do have some pig work going on, and that's in conjunction with white-tailed deer work too, because we want to see how pig behavior influences white-tailed deer behavior. We've done a large-scale deer hunter study where we've altered the hunter density across the landscape, had the hunters carry GPS units, and then we've looked at how those hunters and their behaviors then influenced white-tailed deer movement, habitat use, and several other things that we looked at. And so some of that is really interesting as well. But one of the first studies that really opened the door to all of the GPS work was some work that we did looking at how weather influences deer movement. And I know that you're particularly interested in that.
Yeah, that's right. Hey, can I get you, see if you can move that microphone a little bit further away?
Okay.
It's still, and there might be nothing you can do about it, but like I said, the software will kind of fix that.
Okay, testing. How's that? Any better?
Yeah, that sounds good. And just in natural conversation to, get louder and quieter. So, yep.
Okay.
That sounds good right now. So, okay, I'm just going to ask you another question. So where can the average person find the results of these research? Is that something you guys publish yourselves, or is that go in trade journals or anything like that?
Yeah, we try to do it on multiple outlets. Usually what we'll do is we'll start off with presentations. A lot of our presentations are giving at like our local and regional wildlife society meetings, as well as the Southeast Deer Study Group, where most of the research is presented. From there, we'll usually go to a scientific journal. And so that's really not for the layperson just to pick up for some light reading, but that's really where we want to go to make sure that it's scientifically sound, it's rigorous, and once it goes through that entire process, we'll usually push this information out to other outlets. We have our own internal publications, Noble News and Views. Listeners of this podcast can go in there and type that in, sign up to get email alerts. It's a monthly publication, and you'll find articles on there from every aspect that Noble Research Institute studies. And then we'll also do publications into the popular literature, Quality Whitetails, Deer and Deer Hunting, and some of the other hunting type of magazines. We'll try to push our information out as many ways as possible.
Great. Okay. So, and I think a lot of our listeners will be familiar with a lot of those outlets, and we usually have Lindsay Thomas on to come talk about that Southeast Deer Summit as well. So, we'll look forward to hearing what he's got to say about that. Let's go ahead and get into this study that we discussed beforehand, where you actually did a GPS tracking study on 5 different weather patterns and the effect on deer movement. Can you just give me a summary of the study first?
Yeah, let me give an overview. That was done for about 7 years, and this was one of the first GPS studies that was ever done on whitetail deer, where the study was done from 1999 through 2005, and it was funded by Noble Research Institute and conducted on one of our properties. For the study, we looked at 32 deer that we put GPS collars on, and we were taking one GPS location every 15 minutes on these deer. So we were getting some very, very frequent GPS locations. And then when you want to know movements, that's the way to go, because it gives you a more accurate reflection of the true movement behavior of the deer. We had 17 females that had GPS collars on there and 15 males that had GPS collars. And these deer were collared across the seasons of spring, summer, and what I'll call winter, because it typically fell, later in the year, November, December, January in time frame. And then we did look at 5 weather patterns to see how they influenced deer movement. Those were temperature, wind speed, barometric pressure, relative humidity, and precipitation. And we also threw one other one in there that you'll typically see in the popular literature, and that's how does moon phase affect deer movement.
Yeah, and I guess we've talked about some of those somewhat. And this little, I guess, discussion we're having, we're looking specifically at weather because I think it's widely held belief that colder weather means better movement. And I wanted to find out what the study had to say as far as temperature.
Yeah, I'll definitely get into that. The overall finding that we typically tell our listeners and our readers is there was really no pattern in what we found in terms of how weather influenced deer movement. But there's also one thing that kind of confounds how people see deer movement versus observations. And the conversations typically go back and forth where I'm not seeing deer, and they think that if they're not seeing deer, that means they're not moving. And that's not true from what we found, because you really have to take habitat into play where deer can maintain normal movement patterns, and you may not see them because they've moved into another habitat type to kind of mediate some of those weather conditions that they experience. So just because you don't see deer doesn't mean that they're not moving. It just may mean that they're in a different habitat. So we kind of let let everyone know that there is a difference between observation and movement. And this study's, strictly about movement. But I'd say let's start off with temperature and look to see how that one influenced deer movement, or if it even did, as I mentioned. And we looked at the data so many different ways. I mean, we did temperature justice in terms of if there was going to be any type of effect of temperature on deer movement, we were going to find it. We looked at, very fine scale movements within an hour and related that to temperature. We also looked to see how temperature deviated from day to day. So a drop, that would be like a cold front coming in. The temperature drops, and compared to the previous day, it's 20 degrees cooler. So how does that influence deer movement? And then we looked at it in terms of the seasonal patterns, because we know that deer have these real strong seasonal patterns, crepuscular movement. They're active in the morning, they're active in the evening, but we also see the summer pattern where movement is much less than some of the other seasons. And that could be a general influence of temperature over a seasonal scale, that deer just alter their movement somewhat. But at a fine scale, when we're looking at how do deer move each hour as it relates to temperature, there wasn't any effect there. And anything that we found, it was very minor. And when you're talking that we have such a large data set, we can say that deer movement was 15 yards shorter on a warmer day than a cooler day. Well, 15 yards is really kind of our GPS error, so it really doesn't tell us anything. And so that's why we say we couldn't detect any patterns or trends. The other thing that we looked at was, as I mentioned, how does temperature deviate from a seasonal average? And deer have already responded to these seasonal changes that progress throughout a year. And so once you start looking at how the temperature changes compared to a seasonal average, we still weren't seeing any patterns in there of how temperature affected it. So, for example, in the few instances that we did see a minor effect, movement would increase with decreasing temperatures. But again, that was very, very minor, where they wouldn't be much different, and it wasn't consistent across the sexes. So it didn't matter if it was a buck or a doe. It didn't matter if you were looking at the evening period or the morning compared to midday or during the middle of the night. We just couldn't detect anything. The results were real sporadic and weren't very telling. So then we moved on and we looked at it a different way. And so now we're looking at a change from day to day. And as I described earlier, we like to describe this as kind of like a cold front moving in, where it's going to drop the temperature over a one-day period. So when we looked at it this way, again, we found a few patterns here and there, but nothing really as it related to temperature. What we did find for females during the middle of the night, they would increase their movement with increasing temperature, and males during the middle of the day would increase their movements with increasing temperature. But that's the only two instances that temperature influenced deer movement at all. And one was during the middle of the day, one was during the middle of the night, and it wasn't at the normal movement periods that we'll see with deer, morning and evening. So again, that really doesn't show us any consistent pattern of how temperature influences movement.
Yeah, wow, it sounds like that was a very thorough study. I guess once you get all that data, the nice thing is you have as long as you want to look at it. You can look at it 100 different ways, statistically, without having to go get new data.
Yep, and we did. So kind of what you bring up, and we can slice it and dice it so many different ways. I just made a note here that we actually looked at it 60 different ways if you add up all the different combinations. And so that's what we wanted to do. We had heard so much, discrepancies in the popular literature versus scientific literature of how temperature and other weather variables influence movement. So with this much data, if we were going to do it, we were going to do it right, and we were going to go big and try to examine it any way possible where we could detect any type of an effect. And it just wasn't there, because what I'd really like to tell hunters is I'd like to tell them that there are patterns or there are trends, but basically anytime we found, like you said, a statistical significance, it was just random, and there wasn't any matching between bucks and does. It wasn't always consistent in the morning. It wasn't always consistent in the evening, and that's what makes it really hard is, these few instances without any patterns.
So we didn't even get a chance to get into this before we got into this interview. Do you hunt yourself, Dr. Webb?
I do hunt, as most of us do, and I think that's what drove a lot of us to get into this field and do a little research to learn more about some of the animals that we do hunt.
So how did you feel before and after the study about deer movement and temperature?
Well, from hunting all the years before I did this study, because this study was actually part of my PhD, so I was able to study whitetail deer for my master's. I was able to hunt from probably about the age of 15 and up when I actually had access to some property. And one thing, that I'm looking at those times is, again, it goes back to observations versus movements. I didn't have any way to really study the animals early on during my hunting career. So it was all based on observations of me seeing deer, at certain times. And really back then, game cameras weren't even available. And I know a lot of people have gone to game cameras to try to pull some information, because a lot of those game cameras will give you a stamp on moon phase and temperature. And that's great for people to start accumulating that information and getting as much as they can. So really, when I hunted, I would hunt any chance I had. And I wouldn't limit myself to not going out just because I thought I might not see deer. I just figured the more time I'm hunting, the more likely I am to see deer. And if I don't see deer, that may be my own fault. I may have to change up where I'm hunting. So again, that falls into that observation realm, that just because you don't see deer doesn't mean they aren't moving. And so, I didn't have any, notion of how what I observed would relate into, an actual movement behavior. So this was eye-opening. And again, the one thing that we didn't do on the study was to look to see what habitats those deer were using, because we may have detected a shift in habitat in relation to weather more so than detecting a change in movement relative to weather. And again, that's just deer seeking out, thermal protection, for example, getting into some cover where, they can thermal regulate better, expend less energy, and can still forage. So really, I've hunted deer and I've shot deer and blowing winds with rain falling and everything in between.
Yeah, and I guess you bring up that point a couple times. I think the popular thinking is that, deer are more likely to be out in fields and food plots and, feeding on grains and that kind of thing when the temperatures get real cold. So I guess with what you're saying, that may be still a possibility, that they would be tending to go to those food sources more often?
Yeah, see, that's where it's hard, because I really want to tell you some real scientific-based information, but that's where I'm speculating, saying it would probably be a change in habitat. So if it's really cold and the wind's blowing, that's not good for a deer to be able to thermal regulate, and they're probably going to expend more energy trying to stay warm. So that's one of those situations where you may not see them in the open, but they may seek some brushy type of area, some cover, some wooded area where they can go in there. They can do their normal thing as if they were foraging, eat a little bit, but be out of that bad weather, just like we don't want to be in the bad weather. We'll go seek somewhere else and maintain our normal patterns. I don't know if this is the best example in the world, but it would be like a nice day, nice spring day. We go out and we go for a run. Weather's perfect. That's why we decided, but now it's cold and raining. Well, can we, go inside and exercise? Can we get on a treadmill and put the same miles on? Yeah, if we were tracking ourselves and that was an actual movement, it could record the same movement distance, but we're in a totally different habitat or a totally different environment.
Yeah, and I guess I'm as interested in, or nearly as interested in, your opinion as I am the science. Of course, the science is what we're really looking to evaluate this, but really we need the opinion of experts to help decipher what that really means for us as hunters. So it's interesting to hear, though. It still seems contrary to what a lot of people believe, that with even them seeking cover in real cold temperatures, that's not what you think of when it's like, the temperature dropped 15 degrees. I need to get out to my food plot, an hour early today, or I need to make sure I'm out there today because they're going to be moving. Really what you're saying is contrary to what a lot of popular belief says.
Yeah. And part of that is that just the seasonal movement behavior of deer. So if we think about the times of the year that we are hunting, there's certain things that are going on that are going to increase deer movement anyways. We're probably going to see bucks more often because they're moving more because of the rut. They're looking for receptive does. And so what we found is the bucks that move more are in fact observed more. And so, really you're fighting with a seasonal pattern where deer will move more versus just saying it's related to weather. And so that's really, where we struggle with disentangling all these different factors that can influence deer. And again, I think it comes down to observations, that if somebody immediately says they're not seeing as many deer and they start making note of the weather conditions, well, let's make note of that and let's record it. And we might find something there in terms of our observations being related to weather. But again, it may just be because you're not seeing them. They've moved somewhere else where they're not as visible to you.
I lost my train of thought there for a second. But okay, I think I know what you're going to say, but I'd be remiss to not ask you about the other 4 weather patterns that you looked at. Were you able to find any correlation with anything?
Yeah, that's funny. That's kind of why I opened up that way, that really, I can sum it all up in about 30 seconds, that there wasn't any patterns. And overall, out of those 5 weather variables, temperature was the one that did influence deer more than the others in about 20 to 25% of the analyses that we looked at. There was some level of temperature effect. Now, when you get into the other 4 weather variables, it drops way down, where wind speed, in only one instance out of 60 did we detect any type of effect of wind speed on deer movement. And then barometric pressure, relative humidity, those were very minor as well. Precipitation, I don't believe precipitation ever affected deer movement. So again, even when there was some type of statistical effect, it wasn't a pattern or a trend that can really be relayed to the hunters or the biologists out there for them to be able to make some type of decision or, decide whether or not they want to go out today or not. Again, to me, no pattern in terms of movement means just hunt as much as you can, and eventually a buck's going to make a mistake and you're going to see him. And just remember, bucks move more during the rut, and those bucks that move more are observed more often than some of the other bucks that have this different type of behavior or strategy where they confine their movements to smaller areas and they move less.
Well, that's really, really interesting. Do you guys have any plans for future studies that might involve hunter observations or something where you could track more? I'm really interested to get to the bottom of how some hunters that I really, really respect, people that have been hunting a long time, feel so strongly about these observations. I feel like there's got to be some type of reasoning there other than just some type of bias.
Yeah, and like you said, there are certain hunters that are very successful and they always observe deer, or they're always successful at harvesting one. As part of one of our studies where, again, we looked at the effects of hunters on deer movement, we tried to record everything that we could to look at how hunters influence deer behavior. And a couple of things popped up there, and what I kept referring to as deer that move more or observe more. Well, that's what we got out of that study. All of the hunters had to record all of their buck movements, and then whichever buck was identified, because it had ear tags, we would go back and we would look at that buck's particular movement behavior, where that buck was located in terms of habitat use, and a suite of other factors. And the only thing that influenced whether or not a buck was observed was how much it moved. And then we also looked at the hunter side too, and we haven't looked into this fully, but it's something that that can be really interesting with studied deer to death. I'm a deer researcher, but we have done a lot of work on that. Something that we haven't done a lot of research on are the hunters themselves. And so is it certain behaviors or certain areas that these hunters pick that make them successful? And we have that data. We just haven't dug into it too deep. But the one thing that we just scratched the surface on is there is a huge range in differences of hunter ability and their ability to observe deer and have the potential to harvest deer. We had some hunters that could go out there and day after day, they could see the most deer, and it would take them hardly any time at all to see deer. And then we had hunters that would spend hours and hours on the field day after day and hardly see any deer. And so that's what we want to dig into a little bit as well, is what's going on? What are the differences between these hunters and what's driving their ability to observe deer? And again, it's the same day that these hunters are going out there. And so we can't say it's solely because of weather, because all the deer and all the hunters are experiencing the same weather conditions, but some are seeing deer and some aren't.
Well, once you start figuring some of those things out, I think we're going to have you back on to talk about those, because as hunters, I think that's what the other 90% of us are trying to figure out, what those 10% of guys are doing that are killing all these big bucks.
Exactly. And again, like we just brought up, that temperature issue is so difficult, but when it's the same deer and the same hunters experiencing the same weather conditions, but some guys are seeing and some aren't, there's something else going on. So maybe let's dig into the hunters themselves and start seeing what they're doing. And maybe we'll learn quicker from studying hunters than we will from studying deer.
Well, thank you so much for giving me the time to talk to us about this. I really enjoyed this conversation and appreciate you coming on.
Oh yeah, no doubt. It's always fun to talk about deer movements, especially some of these controversial issues. I know everybody has their own ideas and, based on their experiences and everything. So I like to talk, like you said, from the scientific side, non-biased, versus just from the hunting aspect as well.
Now, I might be putting you on the spot here, but do you know what that Twitter handle is or not Twitter, but Instagram handle is that you've got?
Yeah, if anyone wants to follow the research that I'm doing here at the Noble Research Institute, or some of the past research that I've done with elk and mule deer, greater sage grouse, you can go to Instagram and follow me at my handle at Dr. Webb's Wildlife. That's Dr. Webb's Wildlife.
And I highly recommend that. Anywhere else people should reach out to you or look for your stuff?
You can always do a search. Just do like everybody says, Google it, type in my name, Stephen Webb and Noble, and you'll find different pages, and they're called ResearchGate. And if you happen to find my profile on ResearchGate, that's where you can get all my publications, from scientific articles to popular articles. So that's one I would recommend for people wanting to dig deeper and actually start studying more in depth to be a scholar of deer, whether you're a hunter or an actual biologist. So that's the one I would recommend, kind of behind Instagram. That's kind of the brief updates with some summary points of the major findings from each of our studies.
Great. Well, thank you so much again.
All right. Appreciate it, Mike. Thank you very much.
All right. That's going to wrap up part 1 of the series. Part 2 is going to be next week. I hope you are as excited as I am about it. I still am going to need to do some additional recording because the guys I interviewed at the beginning have not heard this yet. So I'm going to talk to them, get that put together. That is scheduled to release on September 27th. If you are not yet subscribed to the Down South Hunting Podcast, make sure you subscribe so as you get that as soon as it's available. And go ahead and share this on social media. Share it on Facebook. We'll have a post. If I get enough demand to release it extra early, I'm going to work hard. I'm going to try to get it out a few days early. So go ahead and share the post. Let us know what you think of it. And if there's enough demand for it, we might be able to get the next episode a little bit earlier for you. Thanks a lot for listening, and we're out down south.